So after my Transformers video on the absence of Megatron, which did very well and I think is still doing well, several people brought up that everyone's favourite Decepticon leader was on ice at the Hoover Dam, which caused some understandable debate. So in a follow-up to that video, I'll be explaining why this movie and its predecessor Bumblebee are part of a new universe. Now, the biggest point that Rise of the Beasts and Bumblebee are part of a new timeline is the new character designs from Bumblebee and this upcoming movie. Using the Cybertron flashback as a reference, the characters are all sporting fresh looks inspired by their G1 designs. Optimus Prime especially has received a complete redesign from his Bayverse look. He now transforms into the classic red truck we saw not just in G1 but at the end of Bumblebee too. Despite the G1 designs influencing the characters in this film, there are still a few details taken from the Bay films as well. For example, Optimus Prime's face without the battle mask is very recognisable from the Bay films. The same point goes with Bumblebee transforming into the 77 Camaro from TF1. The only reason these elements were included in the designs was to harken back to the Bay designs in some way, which is also why Bumblebee has a battle mask in his solo movie. These were points I actually brought up in my podcast The Movie Geeks with Brandon Prime, where it's actually recognisability that's brought these design elements back to the films. So why are people bringing up the Bayverse after all this time? Well, that's actually because early in development, the Bumblebee movie was intended to act as a prequel to the first Transformers film. This movie is actually set in 1987, so it's 20 years prior to the first film. So Sam Witwicky has not been born yet, thank God. In the worst of the Bay films, Transformers The Last Night, we actually discover that Bumblebee has been on Earth for decades, with a flashback showing him and Hot Rod assisting the Allied forces in World War II. But Bumblebee, despite the Bayverse fanboys saying otherwise, is a reboot, and that has been confirmed. Now, had that movie bombed horribly, then odds are it would have been part of that messy continuity anyway, but it did brilliantly, so it's a reboot. Bayverse fanboys, if you're watching this, then I'm sorry to disappoint you, but Bumblebee, Rise of the Beasts, and the next two films in that trilogy are a reboot, so go and cry about it. Alright? Good. So this movie is giving us another faction, yet many, of Transformers, one of which will be known as the Maximals. Now, for those who don't know, the Maximals was a faction of Transformers from the Beast Wars cartoon, which this movie has perhaps pulled from, and we're introduced to the Maximals, who are descendants of the Autobots. So the Maximals from Beast Wars consist of Optimus Primal, Rhinox, Rat Trap, Cheetor, Dinobot, Tigatron and Airazor, and several of these characters are going to be making appearances in this movie, and it looks like we'll be getting a few of these characters in particular. And thus far we've seen Primal, of course, along with Cheetor, Rhinox and Airazor. Now in the Bay films there is no mention of the Maximals existing, so that adds further fuel to this being a reboot. Now the timeline of the Bay films is messy and too convoluted to follow, so I'll leave that for another time. The Bumblebee timeline so far has been left fairly simple, as the movie opens during the War for Cybertron, which leads to the Autobots fleeing Earth and the plot of the Bumblebee movie happens. As mentioned previously, the Bumblebee movie takes place in 1987, and Rise of the Beasts is set several years later around the early to mid-90s. So a lot of time has passed since the first film in this new series, and several fans have brought up the point that more stuff from the cartoons may carry over. In the Transformers Prime 2-parter titled Orion Pax, we get some backstory on Optimus Prime and how he came to be, and as well as how he came to meet Megatronus, who would then go on to become Megatron. I could perhaps see the next trilogy doing something similar with Optimus, perhaps revealing his backstory like in the G1 cartoons. We don't actually know yet if Optimus has the matrix of leadership in this continuity, so it'll be interesting to see whether that gets explored too, especially if Unicron ends up showing up, because the matrix is really the only thing that can kill him. So, after Rise of the Beasts, we're going to be getting 2 more films as part of a planned trilogy, which starts with the upcoming movie. Now, with Scourge and the Terracons as the main villains of this movie, I think we're eventually going to see more villains from the Transformers universe show up. I for one would love to see many of the Combiners show up, whether it be Bruticus, Menasor or Devastator, in that case done correctly. But I think it's inevitable that we'll actually see Megatron show up in one of these movies in some capacity. And that very much concludes this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you've got time, then check out my podcast, The Movie Geeks with Brandon Prime, where we talk about films, TV, and everything in between. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Take care, everyone.